Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania has a major problem. Not Jonathan Majors, of course, because he's an S-tier actor, but a story problem that is present throughout the entire film. A problem so critical that despite being chock full of amazing visuals and serious implications for the future of the MCU, it ultimately leaves this film feeling like a mostly hollow experience. And if we're being technical here, it's really three problems that are all intertwined. You see, Quantumania doesn't have a protagonist, and because it doesn't have a protagonist, it has no theme. And because it has no theme, the movie has no heart. But let's break this down into pieces. If my first statement sounds confusing, I'm not surprised. The movie is titled Ant-Man and the Wasp. Surely at least one of them is the protagonist, right?
Wrong, sir. Wrong!
Even if we look past the fact that Evangeline Lilly's character is sidelined for the vast majority of the film, Paul Rudd as Scott Lang doesn't really do anything to move the story forward, at least not in a meaningful way. He doesn't have a character arc. He doesn't really want anything in particular. His relationship with Cassie is a little strained at the beginning of the film, but that issue is completely resolved out of nowhere because she helped lead a revolution in the quantum realm, I guess? Sure, he wants to rescue Cassie when she gets held hostage by Kang, but that doesn't happen until halfway through the movie. The vast majority of the story seems to go by on autopilot, rather than being driven by any sort of active protagonist. You need at least one character that the audience can really root for, and in order to do that, you have to understand what it is that the characters are trying to achieve. But other than the general idea of the quantum realm is weird and we shouldn't be here, the story just kind of meanders from one visually interesting shot to the next. And don't get me wrong, the movie is visually engaging from start to finish, but without a protagonist that we empathize with and are invested in, the movie just feels empty. Look at Avengers Endgame, for example. That movie is filled to the brim with spectacle, but that spectacle only matters because we care so deeply about the people on screen. The time heist and portals fight made audiences cheer with excitement because the emotional stakes were so clearly set up. If our heroes succeed, they bring back everyone that they lost. If they don't, Thanos snaps away the entire universe and starts again. What's kind of baffling is that Avengers Endgame is an ensemble movie, and yet Scott Lang is more engaging in that film than he is in Quantumania. We are made to sympathize with him as he comes out of the quantum realm to find Earth in shambles. His reunion with Cassie is so cathartic because we truly feel how scared he is, and understand how strange it must be to see his daughter 5 years older than when they were last together.
You're so big.
If we're being honest, they should have structured this movie like Finding Nemo. If Scott was overprotective and dismissive of Cassie, driving her to secretly experiment with the quantum realm and getting trapped within it, we'd be much more compelled to watch Scott chase after her in a desperate rescue attempt. Along the way, he could see just how capable Cassie is on her own, and ultimately be more trusting of her in the future. But rather than being emotionally impactful like Finding Nemo, the film instead feels like a less iconic Shark Boy and Lava Girl. Now, maybe they wanted this film to be more focused on the villain than anyone else, but in that case, you have to give Kang a meaningful arc. For example, Scarlet Witch winds up being the main focus of Multiverse of Madness, but she's also in the movie from the inciting incident onward. She not only drives the narrative forward, but is the main source of tension in the film. Not to mention that she changes over the course of the narrative, ultimately deciding to not follow through with her plans. But Kang only arrives at the midpoint, and it's mostly his henchmen that actually create conflict throughout the majority of the film. He has history with Michelle Pfeiffer's character, but they never explore that in a meaningful way. He spends most of the time just delivering menacing monologues and hanging out in his citadel. Now, please don't for a second think I blame Jonathan Majors for this. He delivers an excellent performance, but has his hands tied due to the script of this movie being underdeveloped. The movie simultaneously seems to only function as a means to introduce Kang the Conqueror into the MCU, while also seeming like it isn't all that interested in that character. Now, because it's unclear whose movie this is supposed to be, the lack of theme is all the more noticeable. I mentioned in my analysis of Top Gun Maverick that theme is everything to a screenwriter, and after seeing this movie, I stand by what I said more than ever. If the theme was more clearly defined or effectively explored, then not having a clear protagonist could be excusable. Shows like Game of Thrones or The West Wing, for instance, are held together by the themes they examine, not by any one individual character's journey. But Quantumania delivers on neither front. I think the theme they were trying to go for was not to overlook the little guy, and that even the small fights are worth fighting. But if that's the case, they really dropped the ball. Cassie is supposed to be the emotional core of the movie, but her utilization as is makes her incredibly unlikable. She acts like her dad isn't doing anything with his life, just because he's taking a bit of a break after literally saving half the universe. She's deeply disappointed in him just because he cares more about his daughter's well-being than some random quantum realm rebellion that they both just found out about 5 minutes ago. I think an easy way to fix this issue would have been to make it so that Cassie was a local activist and her dad is now a big-time Avenger that's always away on important missions. That way, they could lean into the idea that he's so focused on global issues that he never has time to focus on the little things. Then, over the course of his journey in the quantum realm, he could realize that the big issues are really just made up of little issues, and that even the smallest of actions can have a big effect in a given community. This could also tie into how Kang is eventually overthrown. He doesn't believe that Ant-Man and his family can stop him because they're cosmically insignificant, but in overlooking the little guy and a class 2 society of hyper-intelligent ants, he is ultimately defeated. But they didn't do that. So everything just kind of happens and never really feels like it's for a reason. The movie feels aimless because there is no guiding message that it's building towards. Now, because the movie lacks a clear protagonist or theme, there's also no heart to the movie. And when I say heart, I mean that X factor that makes a film feel like it's more than the sum of its parts. If you look at just about any James Cameron movie, for instance, you really feel what the core purpose of the story is supposed to be. Terminator is a cautionary tale about technology and changing your fate. Avatar is a story of conservation and found family. And Titanic is a love story focused on recognizing victims of a tragedy as people, rather than just statistics. But what is Quantumania really about? What does it make the audience feel? What are they supposed to take away? That the quantum realm is freaky? That Kang will return? None of that is justification for taking up an audience's time. Stories are meant to be about humanity, and the viewers should come away from the film having gained something. I think the lack of overall direction is felt most heavily in the highly inconsistent tone. The Ant-Man saga has, up until this point, been first and foremost a comedic one. Sure, all the Marvel movies have a few jokes, but Ant-Man 1 and 2 are straight up comedy films. The intensity of Kang's storyline isn't one that naturally fits into the genre of comedy. That being said, it is possible to cleverly merge two distinct tones into one film. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 manages to feature deep contemplations of grief, family trauma, and redemption alongside goofy slapstick comedy, but it takes an extremely deft hand to accomplish this. James Gunn expertly crafts the story so that jokes are placed only where it's appropriate, and the jokes themselves play a part in how the characters cope with the emotionally charged situations that they find themselves in. Meanwhile, Quantumania has some legitimately laugh out loud moments, but when you insert MODOK calling himself a right alongside Kang potentially escaping and destroying the universe, It just feels out of place. And this is why the heart of a film is so important. All of the elements in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania fall somewhere between fine and legitimately great, but the overall film is less than the sum of its parts, and winds up feeling like a disappointing movie because its puzzle pieces are so awkwardly smashed together. Ultimately, I don't know who is responsible for the movie coming together like this. Maybe the studio was pushing so heavily to set up Kang that they didn't care how it affected the story that the Ant-Man team actually wanted to tell. Or maybe this is exactly how everyone always planned it to turn out. Either way, it proves to me that people don't like Marvel movies because of the superheroes. They like Marvel because, for the most part, they are really good stories that just happen to be about superpowered people. Marvel is usually really good about nailing the fundamentals of screenwriting, but Quantumania prioritizes spectacle far more than it does story, and the movie ultimately suffers because of it. Anyways, if you like this video and are interested in more thoughts on storytelling in cinema, click here. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.